What's going on, guys? This is Foresight Capital, and today we're going to talk about my technical analysis chart that we've been working on over the past couple of days for Palantir, and ultimately how I came to identify these support and resistance levels, as well as when I started actually working on the price action of Palantir, so that we can talk about how much these support and resistance levels actually predicted versus how much of the price action had already happened. The biggest question that I get in the comments is, what do the levels mean and how did you come about them? So that's what we're going to tackle today. I think it's important to first notate when I started covering the stock, which was about on Monday, right in the middle of the graph here, just past the center of the graph. So what I'm going to do is actually draw a trend line down the screen here to identify the point at which the price started being predicted by the technical analysis versus what had already happened. And we'll go ahead and make this green and a little bit thicker so that you can kind of keep that in mind for where this price action ultimately started being predicted. So keep in mind that this line means everything past this point is going to be what's been predicted by the actual technical movements in the stock. So we'll start kind of covering the lines of resistance and support from the top down so that we can get a good idea of where they were formed. Keep in mind that this is just a 20-day trading period, and Palantir has only been publicly traded for about 2 months, so there isn't a ton of price action to look at a daily chart. That's why we've had the 1-hour chart open to give us a good idea of more short-term price movements. So each of these candles then represents 1 hour of price movement within the stock. And we'll start at the top down here with this red trend line, which is about the $27.70 per share range, $27.67 to be exact. This ultimately became a little bit of support and resistance with this price action here. So we had seen after the big takeoff in the Palantir stock price, a big move towards this $27.67 area, which acted as a bit of resistance. And then on the very next candle, we broke above it with another big move upward, and the low end of the candle actually created some downside support. We saw another big move up in the next hour, and then a little bit of a pullback where this price ultimately didn't fall below and close below this support line. We then saw a big trend up to all-time highs before a sell-off, in which case the stock again came back to this roughly $27.67 area and used that as support before trending up again. So at that point, we've kind of got a very short-term identified level of about $27.67 that the stock has used for both resistance and support. So while the breaks aren't exactly clean and we've had some price action move below this level of support, the price ultimately kind of bounced up and then used it as true support a couple of candles later, thus giving us a pretty good range of support and resistance with $27.67. The next level down is in the $24.60 per share range, or $24.59 is what TD Ameritrade says here. Now the lines are pretty thick. I've made them thicker to ultimately be able to see them better, so plus or minus a couple cents on either side of this. This ultimately became support when we saw this price action in this area. Again, after the big run-up started happening just before the Thanksgiving holiday, we saw a big buying candle that was ultimately kind of pushed down and suppressed by this $24.60 level, and a fallback in price before testing it again and was pushed back as resistance again. And then ultimately one big buying candle kind of broke us through this yellow level, and then the very next candle faded and used this level as support before continuing on the trend. So at this point we had basically 1, 2, 3, 4 big candles that traded around this level of resistance and then ultimately treated it as support with the very next big candle before continuing the overall trend. And again, that's at the 24.60-ish level. The next level down here has been a big time support and resistance. We can see that there's a ton of price action that happened around this. Again, stemming from this recent uptick just before the Thanksgiving holiday, we had the candles in the 4 p.m. hour and then a couple more candles throughout the day use this 20, we'll call it 2260 level as resistance. We can see that the price really had trouble breaking through it in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. And after consistently testing this price level for 5 consecutive hours, we had buyers come in and push the price up to basically the yellow level of resistance that we've already covered. And then the price faded for the next 1, 2, 3, 4 trading hours, each time failing to realistically or really break below this 2460 per share range. We had another test of this yellow resistance and then yet another pullback where for a couple more hours the bears would not give up the 2250 range. And then we had a big push in price, which ultimately is kind of the big push towards all-time highs that we saw just before the Thanksgiving weekend. So those are kind of the 3 big levels of support and resistance that we've been talking about. There's another big level down here indicated by the orange line, which we can see after a sort of consolidation period after moving up from the blue line, which we'll talk about in just a moment. We had a pullback in price, and then the bears again would not kind of give up this $18 per share line. And that's ultimately, after testing this line multiple times, what caused the price to trend up towards the green $22.50 per share price point. 18 also happens to be the number that some of the analysts in the industry have pegged their overall price target for Palantir at. So if we do see the stock continue this downtrend that it's been on, which seems to have actually stopped for now, but if it is just a short-term consolidation after a big pullback, potentially we do see Palantir coming to this $18 per share level. And then the last level of support that we have here started realistically at the very beginning of this big uptrend. We saw the price go from $11.45, have a couple of big spike candles, and then really a pullback to this roughly $14 per share range at $13.87 is most realistically the support. We saw a little bit of a price spike and then coming right back down to sort of test this line, another price spike, and then coming back down to test this $13.87 per share line again, and that's realistically the last that we saw out of that. So those are sort of the big vertical or horizontal support and resistance levels for this stock. We do have a long-term trend line, which is notated by this red support level, and it's a little harder to zoom in on, but we can see that realistically when the trend started, we were sitting on this red support line. Price action spiked up, and then we saw some more consolidation along this line with actually one candle here closing below the long-term trend line. But the very next candle, the bulls came back in and pushed the price above the long-term trend line, and we used it as support again here for a couple of trading days during the middle of November. We saw the price spike again and then another pullback towards this long-term trend line before ultimately having this really huge run-up in price where the stock almost doubled. And then this pink trend line, which is sort of the downtrend, a short-term downtrend that we saw, pushed the price all the way back down to the long-term trend line, which did hold, and we were able to kind of push through this wedge that was created by the long-term trend line and the short-term downtrend line. And we're coming back to another point where over the next couple of trading days, specifically on Monday, we're going to see the stock testing this long-term trend line again. So remember, all of the price action after this green line here was really dictated by the support and resistance lines that we drew. Or not that the price action was dictated by that, because that would imply that traders were trading around this, but it does show kind of the levels that traders are going to use. So we can see here that the price broke below this red support line. We trended sideways for a bit, and the bulls made one more push to try to break above. We were rejected by this recently formed downtrend, and then the price fell to this yellow support line, which ultimately was a previous resistance line and a really good indicator for where we could see some support in the price during that sell-off. We again made a little bit of a bull run. This time we were not able to come back up to the red resistance line, and instead were forced down by this pink trend line. Ultimately, the price formed around the green support line, which was previous resistance and previous support. So the candlestick chart kind of played out exactly as we expected here. When we weren't able to hold this as long-term support, we were able to fall back on both the 200 period moving average and the long-term trend line to again find support. And then the price broke above the short-term downtrend, this pink line, and used the yellow support line again as resistance. So now we're seeing this resistance line hold strong at about 24.50, and we're getting pushed up by this red long-term support line. And ultimately, there's a couple of ways that this could play out. As the price consolidates in between this level, we could realistically see the long-term trend, which is what I expect to happen, push the price above this resistance line that's been created. Remember, it was previous support and previous resistance, so it's a very strong line, and that's why bulls and bears are kind of fighting back and forth here as to which way we want the stock to go. The other alternative is that we break this long-term trend, and realistically we're going to look at these green, orange, and blue levels as sort of support levels for the price to trend down to, because without a whole lot of fundamentals going on with the stock, a lot of this is going to be technically based over the next couple of weeks until there's ultimately some next quarter earnings, which are expected sometime in January or February. So again, that's just what the lines represent and the price points. Again, the red line is about 27.67. The yellow line's about 24.60. The green line is about 22.59. The orange line is right in the $18 per share range, and the blue line is right around 14. So I had a lot of people ask those specific lines for those mobile viewers where it's maybe a little hard to see. And then remember that this green line that we've drawn here is basically where the support and resistance lines that we had previously drawn based on previous price action really take effect and start showing us the overall trend of the stock. So I really hope that this video brought you some value and shed some light onto exactly what we've been talking about price point wise within the videos. If it did bring you value, and if you want to continue to see more technical and fundamental analysis on not only Palantir but other stocks in the future, don't forget to subscribe, because I'm going to be doing some deep dives into other stocks as they kind of become relevant in the YouTube world. Thanks for stopping by, and catch you in the next one.